Hello! So, ignore my appearance and my stuffy voice. I got cold and I couldn't be bothered with makeup and stuff, but here I am in my, lipsticked beauty. Not. Basically, today is just a video to say I have reached 100 subscribers. This exciting milestone happened last week. Thank you very much to everybody. I've been sort of deliberating what I could do to mark the occasion. I thought giveaway, and I thought, I wasn't keen on the idea. Then, inspired by two things really. I was reading Amanda Palmer's The Art of Asking, and also by Lena over at Just Kiss My Frog, who I'll link down below, her idea of bathtub busking and the fact that, art doesn't have to be perfected. I mean, she speaks about in terms of music, but I'm sort of taking it more generally. Art doesn't have to be perfected to be shared. We should just share it for the pure joy of it. And also in The Art of Asking, there's kind of the same themes, but also the fact that, you have to build up a trust with your audience and you have to give them in order for them to sort of give you back sort of thing and everything like this. Really good book, recommended. Reviews will be coming up later. But basically, inspired by that book mainly, I have written a story. Amanda Palmer used to be a live human statue, and I have written a story about a human statue inspired by that idea. And I thought in order to celebrate my 100 subscribers, I would read that story to you. It's not perfected, it's probably not finished. I need to do some work on it, I'm sure. But for now, I'm going to share it with you because I've written the last sort of words and I know that that's where I want it to end. So I'm going to just share it with you and let's spread the love, spread the love. Just to let you know, there is accents in this, which I won't be doing. Just picture them in your heads, because if I try, it's just going to go terribly wrong. Right. George was a statue before he turned to stone. He was a good statue. He had practiced. He would paint himself until no one could see the human in him anymore, and then he would stand on a pile of boxes and pose. He would pose for hours, only breaking character to bow or otherwise entertain someone who had given him money. Sometimes he would take his hat off to them, but he did other things too to keep people interested. Sometimes they would walk away satisfied, but sometimes they wanted more from him. He had been mocked, and people had tried to reveal him as a fraud, as though everybody didn't already know. George found he was pulled into mocking them back silently, and with the crowd on his side, he normally won. He would point a finger as they walked away and do a silent laugh as though it was hilarious. He didn't find interactions like those funny, though. He found them heartbreaking. Be kind to me, he wanted to tell those people. I'm only trying to struggle through. George felt that being a statue was a thing that was either in you or not. He knew it was in him and had announced it to his family just after leaving school when rumours of getting a real job started being thrown about. "Why?" his mum demanded, her Spanish accent and attitude bringing out the tragedy in the situation. "Why you do that, my beautiful baby?" She grabbed at him and tried to pull him close, but he dodged her. "It's not up for discussion," he said, still managing to sound apologetic when he was putting his foot down. "No," she said. "My son's no beggar. My son can be a doctor if he wants." George looked away from her. He noticed his father didn't say anything. "I don't want to be a doctor, Mum. I want to be a statue, I told you." George's mum had run away from Spain when she was about his age. She had dreams then and an idea. She'd forgotten all about that. "It's not begging," he added when she offered no other protest. "It's a performance." "Begging," she said again, turning away from him and busying herself. George turned away too. She was never going to understand. The early days had been shaky, and George hadn't been very good. He had never realised how hard it would be to stand so still for so long. People didn't really give him money when he was losing position all the time, unless they just chucked it in as they rushed past. He certainly never had a crowd. It took about a month for him to master the art of complete stillness, and that was when the crowd started coming. George noticed it was mainly tourists that stopped to watch, locals having seen him so often by then, they really weren't bothered. He tried to keep his eyes as still as the rest of him, but sometimes he would risk a look at the amazement on their faces as they tried to comprehend him, sure that he was a person, but also feeling that slight bit of doubt that he might be a statue after all. It was even better when they gave him money and he jumped into action. Sometimes they squealed with delight and looked at their friends as though to say, "See, I told you it was a person." If there was no crowd and the world was too busy rushing past, George would jump out occasionally and scare people. He always felt bad after he had done it and the person who got scared was walking away with a scowl on their face. He didn't really want to scare people, he just wanted to show them that they should have looked and they should have seen him. Sometimes people he had scared before would give him a wide berth or even cross to the other side of the pavement. It made his heart break. He wished they knew that he only wanted to love them. Sometimes people gave him more than just money. Best were the handwritten notes. barely ever aimed at him, but beautiful just the same. He kept them pinned above his bed. A lot of them were in a language he couldn't understand, but he kept them too and made a promise to himself that he would read them one day, because he owed it to his audience. The note he kept at the top of the pile was one that a girl had thrown in there one day. All it said was, "My heart has been broken, and now I don't know how to breathe." Something happened to George's town that made things go bad for him. The tourists stopped coming. Those crowds who had loved him had all gone. Somehow, it was the middle of summer, and all he saw were locals rushing by, not seeing things properly because they saw them all the time and didn't think it was important to look. After a few weeks of things being that way, another change became apparent. George supposed that other change had happened gradually, but he pretended that it hadn't until it was staring him in the face. It had started with a grey streak in his hair that didn't wash out with the rest of the silver powder. He had noticed it, then put a hat on and forgotten again. The truth was, he had stopped paying full attention to himself. He no longer cared what he looked like when he wasn't performing. He didn't see anyone in the evenings anyway. The street took too much out of him. He couldn't say how long his nose was wrong before he noticed it. Even when it did come to his attention, it wasn't through a mirror, but through a slight itch that he rubbed with the back of his hand. What he found was not the soft flesh of his nose, as he knew it, but a hard, cold surface through which he had no feeling. He walked to the bathroom of the restaurant downstairs. He didn't own his own mirror. And looked at his reflection. On closer inspection, he noticed that the tip of his nose was still silver. He tried wiping it with a wad of tissue, but the silver hue remained. He rubbed harder, but stopped when the very tip of him crumbled off and landed in the sink. Anybody else would have been worried, but George wasn't overly so. As he returned to his room, he shrugged. "I believe in method acting," he told himself. As the business got worse and the people continued to rush past without seeing him, George noticed other parts of himself turning to stone. He didn't worry about them, though, because he was more worried about his food and his house. He had the sinking feeling that there would soon come a time when he would have to join the real world. He thought that was the worst thing, because he didn't belong there. The real world seemed harsh. He couldn't be one of those people always rushing. He wanted to see. The stone didn't stop, and neither did George. He still stood on his pedestal every day, even though the money had gone and he couldn't really do it anymore. The stone took his fingers, then an arm, and then the other one. George stopped worrying about food and figured that that was because his stomach had turned to stone too. This was a relief, and he didn't think about the implications because he was just glad that he didn't need the money anymore. Eventually, his legs turned to stone too, and he stopped needing his home because he couldn't move. He stayed on his pedestal through the night, when even the people who rushed past weren't there anymore. George's priorities were changing. There was nobody in front of him the day his transition completed. His eyes were the last thing to go, his mouth just before them. By then he could tell when the stone was coming, and as he felt himself losing control of his mouth, he made an appeal. "You have broken my heart, and now I have turned to stone," he shouted. Nobody seemed to hear. He let out one last long sigh, and then his lips were stiff. With just his eyes, he tried to snapshot the image, the place in which he had spent so many happy days. He tried his best to ignore the rushing people and instead picture his crowd back where they used to be so that he could remember it the way he wanted. As he was looking, he noticed a girl standing opposite him, across the street. She was barely visible against the ever-flowing life, but he saw her, saw the way she looked at him, saw the tear that trickled down her cheek, the tear she surely cried for him. "You saw me," he thought, as his eyes were gone too, and only his memory of himself was left. "You saw me when nobody else did." And the girl carried on looking after George was gone, because she knew, and she saw, and she saw, and she saw. So that's that. Please leave sort of what you thought down below. Don't be too harsh. As I say, it's not, perfected. I just knew that was where I wanted to finish it, and I wanted to share it with you. Suggestions would be greatly appreciated, and thank you again for 100 subscribers. That's excellent. Bye!